I was gonna ask you, Matamela, how come I'll never see you with the baby? And here you go. You're ready. See, this is why I know I'm going to win $100 million so I can fuel the movement. Look at this baby. Look how she looking up. This baby looking like she got an attitude. Hi, baby. Ah,
Hey,
Now we're getting
Lisa.
smiles.
yes.
Now we're getting smiles. Hi. Oh, so I got it.
We,
My baby fever. I got baby fever. Stop.
I don't have baby fever. We starting out this Harris Daughters R&DP study with some baby Goo Goo Gagas here. Like this is a treat. Ah, a phase. Okay. Welcome everyone. This is the RNDP slash Harriet's Daughters, I'm looking at the wrong camera, study, where we talk about sexual violence and colonial power. And I am President Yejide of the African National Women's Organization, and I'll be leading this study today. If you registered on our platform, you got a link to a document that we're going to read. You can have the link now. You can wait till we read it. It's going to be on screen. And I just want to welcome everybody to the study as we talk about a very important topic around colonial violence, sexual violence, colonial power, how these two are inextricably connected and how it plays a role in the special oppression of African women and the oppression and exploitation of African people. So people tend to, I think generally speaking, when people talk about gendered violence or sexual violence, it's really only talked about in a very narrow view, um, where people talk about it in terms of like patriarchy as if patriarchy was this thing on its own. It didn't exist. It existed in a vacuum and not in relation to a current social system that has that is rooted in violence and rape and sexual violence and all the world over. And so much has been done to African and other colonized people in the to dominate us, and much of what has been done through the use of sexual violation in so many different components. So we'll talk about that today, and which is why I think the conversations that we lead as the African National Women's Organization don't center patriarchy as the primary contradiction, but that colonialism is the primary contradiction. Colonialism is the thing that gave birth to capitalism, and colonialism is the thing that commits all the violence across the world and continues to institute institutions of coercion in our lives. And so and that includes state power in the form of governments and militaries and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. First, I'm going to thank Comrade Matsamela, President of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, for allowing us to have space on the R&DP studies on the third Thursdays of every month. And I want to also appreciate my comrade Coco Lewis, who leads the Harriet's Daughters Book Club, and we'll be having one coming up very soon in a few weeks. And I want to also thank everybody else who watches us live and who also participates in these R&DP studies that I take advantage of because of the amazing, incredible work of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. So as always, I'm going to start out with an overview similar to what I just did, but it's going to be a slideshow, and then we can go into the PE, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So but I genuinely want discussion, and I'm gonna try not to be lecture style this time, and just like really open it up for real discussion around concepts and ideas around sexual violence, rape as a culture, rape culture, rape is violence, and how do we internalize that how do we talk about that as colonized people? So yeah, let's get into it. So the Harriet Daughters study is brought to you by the African National Women's Organization. Today's topic is sexual. Let's go back. I'm going too fast. I'm going. Sexual violence and colonial power, from the plantation to the prison. Rape and sexual violence have never been incidental. They are tools of war and domination used to enforce colonial rule and crush African resistance. This session will examine how rape culture functions as a part of a broader strategy to control African bodies and disrupt African communities, tracing its roots to the attack on Africa that built and sustains colonial capitalism. CAMWO, as some of you may know, is an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, revolutionary African internationalist organization for African women who organize around the pressing local and national and international issues that add to the special oppression of women, African women and femmes. It is a membership organization, so if you are looking at this either live or on afterwards, if you're an African woman and you appreciate today's discussion, we encourage you to become a member of the African National Women's Organization and help and join to organize with us, get to some of this political education internally, and be among, many of the African working class women who declare that colonialism must end and that we have to confront colonialism as a sector of the colonized African masses to ensure that to ensure a future that we want to create, that will be free from oppression and exploitation and ending the special oppression of African women. For this study, we are calling on a donation goal of $100. The $100 helps us meet some immediate fundraising goals. We have some for the HOU, Hands Off Uhuru, that we are still committed to raising for that campaign. And if you are able to donate, we recommend that you go to our website at anwouhuru.org/donate and donate any amount. That will be appreciated. If that's too difficult for you and you can do it through Zelle, you can definitely do that by using our email info@anwouhuru.org. And I'm not very good at recognizing the many people who have donated in the past, but I definitely want to give some shouts out to everyone who has donated in the past during our time on the RNDP study. So I appreciate y'all. And definitely next month, I'll have a list of everyone. Thank you so much. So we also want to encourage you. A way that you can also donate through purchasing items is shopping AMWO, shopping our economic development projects. So we have a storefront and we've created pieces of accessories, clothing with slogans and campaign stuff on there. So if you're interested in seeing what all we have more than just a shirt, a fanny pack, and a mug. We have socks, we got bags, we got other shirts with other sayings and things on there. So if you're interested in finding out more and purchasing, go to anwouhuru.org/storefront to find and purchase more AMWO gear. We also want to encourage you to shop our skin and hair brand, Decolonize. I should have took AMWO. Why do I have it on there? It's decolonize.com is the actual. You don't go to anwouhuru.org/storefront. Go to decolonize.com directly, which is our store for our Decolonize products. Here we have some beautiful African people who are purchasing from us at our tables when we do vend in person. Be like them, be a decolonizer and get you some Decolonize products, which is indigenously rooted, focused on having products that don't have all that stuff in it, and really committed to that. And it's crafted and created by moi. So you can trust that I'm gonna do you good. So definitely go to decolonize.com and get you some of that good stuff. So let's start. So rape culture is colonialism. There's a lot of words on there, so I'm going to read through them. But feel free to doze off as you listen to my melodic voice read the stuff on the screen. So rape culture is colonialism. This is what we said earlier, and it was born in the process of creating the current social structure as we now see. So the rape and pillaging of lands, the murders, the bloodiness, the total eradication of human beings for the sake of oppression, sake of wealth, for the sake of European sustainability, that they have done all of these things, white people, Europeans have done all of these things to ensure their survival. And that's why we call it parasitic capitalism too, because in order for Europe and the United States and all of these so-called empires to survive, they have to suck the lifeblood out of the colonies. And despite there not being any official colonies yet, except for maybe Puerto Rico and Hawaii, um, the colonial process, the colonial mode of production is still intact. And so when Europe invaded Africa, here's the melodic voice coming in. When Europe invaded Africa, they brought with them not only guns and greed, but a violent social system that treated African bodies, especially women's, as property to be conquered and exploited. Through slavery, forced reproduction, and sexual violence, colonialism normalized the use of African women bodies for labor, control, and domination. I want to say that African men were also sexually exploited and sexually violated. I think what's different is that African women's bodies were then used as factories to produce new human beings. And so they had to live with this trauma of being raped and then produce a human being as a result of that rape. So that trauma stayed with them. And then having that child ripped from them, and to produce more wealth for Europeans. I think there's a lot to be said around that generational level of rape. So it's not just about the physicality of it or just the emotional thing that goes wrong with somebody violating your body. It's the ongoing continuation, harmful sort of trauma that happens as a result of having to produce a child from that and continuing to live in a society that continues to rob you of your bodily autonomy. So colonialism imposed patriarchal norms foreign to many African societies, turning African women into targets of violence and African men into enforcers of masculinity learned from the European oppressors. You want to talk about that a little bit more. And in this way, rape culture was institutionalized through colonization as a method of control, not only for women, but of an entire African communities. The term rape culture was used. I don't know if it's used as much anymore, but I know that at some point it was really popular, and it was usually popular and directed toward African men, like and so we did this whole thing. I think the movement did a few years ago when that was like trending as a topic, and the subject was African men, around really changing and shifting the narrative so people understood that rape culture did not originate with African men or any colonized man, but that rape culture is the overarching culture of colonialism. So the violence we witness from domestic abuse to femicide does not exist in a vacuum. It is the product of social and economic system that was built on the destruction of African people, the breakdown of traditional communal relationships, and the exploitation of African labor and land. And capitalism, born out of colonialism, depends on fractured and oppressed communities. It trains African men to enact the same violence they once suffered. I would also say African men and women. African women are not void of, recycling patriarchal colonial norms around gender and sexuality. So African men and women to enact the same violence they once suffered while deflecting responsibility from European systems that created this crisis. To dismantle rape culture, we must not simply teach people to be better. We must confront and destroy the colonial capital structure that made African women and girls the targets in the first place, but also overall African women, African men, African people, the targets of colonialism. So I'm gonna just go through everything because I want us to have a clear discussion without having to go back into any reading. So but I have some prompts and stuff that we're gonna go into after we read this piece. And this piece was submitted by a comrade um out of South occupied Azania, or South Africa, as many of you know it. And as you might also know, this is not it, actually. This is not the article that I wanted to read. Give me 1 second while I get that up on the screen. Mm-mm-mm. As many of you know, South Africa was named, I think, right after Congo is one of the most dangerous places for African women or women to be because African men were seen as the most dangerous. Is the one of the places that if you were a woman, that you are in danger because men raped. Um, and so um, for us to have an analysis that focuses on um, the real core uh, basis for that sort of violence, then I think that's really important for us to engage. And I'm open to like having struggles with folks too. So um, can y'all see that on the screen? All right.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure because sometimes when you change it. All right. So I'm going to ask for help to read this. So if you are interested in reading, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. I can start. And if you want to take it away, it's not a very long piece, but if you want to take it away, it's about 3 pages, almost 3 pages, right? No hands raised, so I'll start reading. Gender-based violence, another symptom of colonial capitalist system. What the South African media has been referring to as gender-based violence is another symptom of a broken society as a result of colonialism and the rise of capitalism. We can't solely blame the perpetrators of these crimes without examining the underlying issues or causes of these social ills that are inherent in colonial domination. Coco, you want to take it from here? Coco.
You know, man, the mute button.
Okay.
Yes, we are right here where you say, yes, we are correct, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, we are correct to be angry, shout and yell at the immediate perpetrators, which are mostly men, for hurting, abusing, raping, and mercilessly killing us. But we should also blame and attack the colonial capitalist system that created and maintained social conditions under which Black people live. This writing emanates, from the recent reports of gender-based violence and merciless killings of Black women and children by Black men in South Africa, especially now during the state-imposed lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Day in and day out, we hear horror stories of women and children being murdered, like the 3-year-old baby girl who went missing for a few days, only to be found killed with stab wounds on her upper body and dumped in a plastic bin. We heard about the 79-year-old woman who got attacked inside her home, and the 25-year-old woman who was axed to death by her ex-boyfriend, and the 28-year-old heavily pregnant woman who was stabbed and hanged on a tree with an 8-month-old unborn baby still inside her, taking 2 lives in one go. This is sickening. It has to stop. Enough is enough. I plead with you to please protect and defend African women and children. If you don't, who else will? African women have been through a lot, and we are still going through a lot. The African community must take a stand to defend African women. We have been subjected to all kinds of pain and violence. We are not only dealing with a colonial capitalist system's exploitation as we generally experience it, we have an additional yoke, okay, on our shoulders as colonized women, which is our special oppression usually carried out within the African colony by other colonized people. Parasitic capitalism, colonialism is rape culture. The first attack African women suffered was colonialism, the foreign domination of entire people for the material and spiritual benefit of the colonizer. Europeans are the first ones who killed, raped, and used African women and men as commodities. Over the course of centuries of subjugation, our brothers became indoctrinated with this nonsensical, immoral, and toxic white culture towards African women. Therefore, what I see happening today is a legacy of colonial capitalist system. With the arrival of the colonial settlers came the rise of capitalism from its primitive accumulation of our resources and labor. They separated our families by taking our fathers, husbands, brothers to the mines to dig up our resources for white consumption, while they turned African women into baby making machines to produce laborers for production. We were turned into maids, demeaned as human beings, and as you still see today, white people make us walk their dogs or carry them around on our backs as babies. Black men adopted the rape culture and violence from Europeans who brought the savagery, death, and destruction from Europe to Africa. Now, our condition has been exacerbated by the material want that our communities are subjected to with the left theft of our resources. When our colonizers attacked and occupied our land, they did that through the barrel of a gun. When they raped and killed African women, they also did it through the use of force and violence. Today, violence and rape culture is synonymous with Black men. They are the face of every cruel and toxic behavior that's happening in the society, while the white men who introduced it are models of good moral behavior. Even today, white people still axe and kill each other, but the first suspect becomes Black men. Both prominent white cases, S.V. Paturis and S.V. Van Breda case, where the white people were brutally killed by their own. Okay. By their own, the suspects and intruders were Black men. These two cases explicitly show us that the white men are not models of good moral and behavior, as the media has made many of us to believe. This thing is embedded in their historical DNA, but they also have a cover-up called Black men. Just as they introduced their cold and cruel religion that they call Christianity, Europeans use violence and instill fear to Black people that they will go to hell if they don't comply. Our forebears, after years of resistance, were ultimately subdued and forced to adopt it. Down with our cultural values. Those who continue to resist this incursion were called pagans, while the converted ones were called Amagobaka. The settlers in Azania not only enjoy the fruit of our labor and resources, but they also brutalize and kill us for us as form of therapy. That is also why they would even kill a 16-year-old boy for allegedly stealing a sunflower, unashamedly shooting and killing Black men in the farms and claiming that they mistook them for baboons. And exactly why they would violently and inhumanly put an alive Black man in a coffin and also feed a Black man to lions in 2005. Europeans have always been violent, and Black people have learned from them. However, by saying all of this, I'm not justifying Black men's behavior, but I want to deal with the underlying cause before we deal with the symptoms. Keep going. Patriarchy is a symptom of colonialism. African women cannot breathe. The environment is not conducive and safe for us. For hundreds of years, the system has been kneeling on our necks in more ways than our equally colonized male counterparts. Therefore, I call upon both African men and women to fist up and fight back and unite against the colonial capitalist system and its patriarchal underpinnings of masculinity over femininity. Yes, we need to dismantle patriarchy together because it came with colonialism. In pre-colonial Africa, Black men and women were united and treated each other with love and respect. Hence, they never raped their women despite walking around braless and wearing traditional miniskirts called inkisiyu. Black men were never discomforted by seeing naked breasts until the colonial settler arrived. In Europe, men treated women like property. And upon their domination of Africa, African men was positioned to be superior to African women. The European settlers reinforced backwards notions such as men are the boss of the house, a woman must bow before them, she is weak and cannot do this and that. Before colonialism, Black men and women were equally working together, plowing the fields in order to produce food. Also, during harvest time, both men and women, boys and girls, would go into the field and work. That is why, even subsequent to our dispossession, both boys and girls would go and herd the cows. For example, Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela grew up herding the cows. Europeans never had equal powers with their women, and a woman was told her place is in the kitchen. So patriarchy is their thing, exclusion of women from power. It came with them. Our brothers learned this and adopted it. It was wrong African brothers, and we will help you unlearn through revolutionary struggle so we can be together as one, fighting our oppressors together. We need Black power. In conclusion, my African brothers and sisters, let's unite and fight together to reclaim our Black power so that our Black lives will matter as we build a new world. Because if we don't crush the capital colonial system, which maintains patriarchy, we are going to continue with these numerous futile hashtags. Men are trash, not my name. Men must fall. I am next, and the rest of them. To you, African men in occupied Tanzania, South Africa in particular, you have to stop your petty bourgeois inspired, nonsensical bro code of loyalty. Call each other out and expose the perpetrators and stop protecting them because they are your friends, homies, and colleagues. The entire African community must take a stance in defending African women from the violence perpetrated against us on a daily basis. Uhuru.
Well, thank you, Coco. Before we get started, I just want to invite people into the Zoom so that you can speak. If you're cool with watching us on the apps, YouTube, Facebook, you're cool with that. But we can't see your comments and we can't hear you. So if you want to join the live discussion, we encourage you to come into the Zoom as well. Go to tinyurl.com/RNDP studies, RNDPSTUDIES, to register and get access to the Zoom live. So, yeah, this is a really, I'm gonna put the link to this in the chat so that y'all can follow along. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see folks. But I wanted to just say that I appreciated this piece so much because it's easy, I think, when, you know, there's a Fuji song says it's easy to hate niggas. I think I've quoted this before. It says it's easy to hate niggas because they look like you, they smell like you, they even sit in same MF and block, because the person that's doing the thing to you is the one that's right next to you. So you can't see the the strings that have pulled all of the fabric apart that has created the conditions and under which your neighbors or your people in your community behave in the way that they behave. And you run along thinking that things have always been this way. Um, and so I appreciate this piece because it doesn't not, center some of the responsibility on the people who actually commit these horrendous crimes inside the colony, but it also recognizes that, when you live in a colony, that there are some extra special sort of circumstances that come into play. We were reading Fanon, Wretched of the Earth, in the chapter concerning violence last weekend. Was it last week or the weekend before last? And in that chapter, he talks about the conditions of colonized people in Algeria, which are generally the conditions of colonized people anywhere, and some of the things that colonized people exert and feel, and psychologically, because he was a psychologist. I always get those two mixed up. Examining the minds of people who were colonized and some of the things that they were centered and focused on. So you understand, like, the mental, sort of ramifications of being colonized. So I just want to open it up and with a couple of prompts. Like, this article talks about a few things, right? Rape as Rape culture as colonial policy, not a cultural norm. It says a couple of very sweeping um, sort of statements that, African men and women were equally responsible for our community, and they learned violence from white men as if African men did not commit violence beforehand. It also talked about gender roles being reinforced or imposed based on European gender roles, um, and it talks about the white man morality when we've seen time and time again throughout history that there is no moral compass in the white world like that we should uphold. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the article. You're very, open up I'm encouraging conversation. So anybody want to say what their thoughts were already first on this article? Okay. Okay, come.
Uhuru, oh,
Oh, my
Coco.
oh.
Uhuru, well, I just appreciate it. I know that I saw I want to give the space, of course, to Coco, but I remember reading an article many, many years ago, and that part that, like, where she says, men must fall and stuff like that, which was a response to fees must fall and roads must fall. And that's actually the moment in which the current leadership in South Africa came into the Uhuru movement,
Mm,
because the truth is, like, that's like, and like I said, it's funny even when I saw people even saying those, but they're just like petty in a way that we say it, but even petty bourgeois just clapbacks. You know
mhm,
what I mean? They don't advance us to a more revolutionary position, and they don't let people see the actual colonial forest for the trees of horizontal violence. And
mhm,
it's not to sort of dismiss it and things like that, but there's a way through which, like, the struggle against racism is like an integrationist struggle, and there's a struggle against patriarchy that just becomes one which sort of seeks to gain, women access into the
yeah.
colonial capitalist system. And I think that, and I know that sort of, I really appreciate this call because it's saying we got to deal with this, but the way we're going to deal with this is through the anti-colonial struggle, which is important. So I'm just, like I said, I'm happy. I appreciate reading this article. And the only reason I raised my hand is because I didn't see Coco or anybody.
Uhuru, Comrade Coco. Thank you, Masamela. Coco, let's see your beautiful
I actually want to that dying
face.
in it because I read. I don't want to dominate, so I do want to allow somebody else, and then I can come back.
No, go ahead, girl. Go ahead.
Okay, so I like, to me this is a very powerful article. Like, I remember when this was first was put out there and even discussed around the discussion around it. I think it's very, very impactful, very powerful, especially when we are in this realm of talking about um, what Africans as in a diaspora versus, just the Africans in America perspective. So this was a really great article to bring that into light, into, because we can always, as an African in the United States, I can see the same things. Like, we, it may not be as overt as it is here, or maybe it is and we just don't know about it. But it reminded me of this article that I'm trying to find. ASAP Rocky wrote for Complex Magazine, maybe in like 2000, maybe like 2000, 2001, maybe, around the early 2000s, where he talked about how, not even rape culture, is the gang rape culture, is how that is. You can't, like, he was speaking about how that is, we have to change that as a culture. We have to change that as Africans in this country, um, because it's so ingrained in us to have these viewpoints. Unfortunately, I was, before we got on this call, I told you I was speaking with you and Masamela about reading When We Refuse. And one of the things with reading old works like that, well, things that are historical based, is how much, even in the struggle for liberation, but which was kind of like the struggle out of slavery, was still the patriarchy was so ingrained in that. You had the women were not, able to speak. We, even though we may have wrote the speeches, but women were not able to speak, in these platforms that highlighted African struggle. So you had in the book, she talk about how um, Malcolm X Ballad in the Bullet actually came from, the idea was planted in him from an African woman, and how, like, we unconsciously we've ingrained ourselves into into the white colonial structure. And it's very important that we adapt, and we accept the theory of African internationalism to decolonize. We have to decolonize ourselves. We have to decolonize each other, and then hold each other responsible for the actions that happen within our community, and not bank on somebody facing consequences and punishment from the colonial state. We have to have that dual and contending power. Uhuru. I know I said a lot in there.
Uhuru, I took some notes. I'm gonna come back to Comrade Don. Thank you so much.
I wanted to say, and it's crazy what Auntie Coco was saying. I wanted to add to that, Auntie Coco, and then it's crazy for me how they're able to, how the colonizers, right, are able to mischaracterize everything for us. I wanted to go back specifically on the settler colonialism aspect of it, because this semester I'm taking a class called Peace Studies. Okay. Uh, um, yes, the look, yeah, right. And so this man, this white man is, egregiously, right, mischaracterizing freaking anti-colonial struggles. He says, I fail to see how Haiti has been decolonizers, how Haiti has been decolonized. He says the Vietnamese did not beat the US forces and stuff like that. And he says that US forces withdrew because nonviolent anti-war movement in the USA. Okay, that's right. So I want to get, in spite of settler colonialism, I gotta ask you, Prez, and everybody, how do they mischaracterize this? I don't. You get what I'm saying? It's so insidious, so egregious, right? How do they keep doing this when we have, right, the history? When we know the truth.
I'm curious to know who the man you're talking about is. He sounds very familiar.
Timothy Bratz.
Bratz. Okay, let me see.
Braatz.
There was a guy that I had that spoke at one of my work meetings, and he was a proponent for anti-violence. He was a, what do you call those people? The pacifist, and he proceeds to speak during a staff meeting because that he was invited to talk about his notions, and he's an author, etc. And what he talks about is the idea of all violence being bad, and even highlights the violence of African people and colonized people, resistance to oppressive violence as a sort of a bad notion too. And one of the things that he highlighted was like the Buffalo Soldiers, which is a contradiction, but there's a backstory to that. And I don't know if his name was Bratz, but it sounds like very similar to what he was saying. And to answer your question, Comrade Don, it's because colonialism has not been destroyed by the colonized, right? So when you have control over everything, when you are the purveyor of the news, you're a purveyor of the culture of exploitation and oppression, you are the purveyor of the institutions that uphold the very system that you are hoping to protect. You're a purveyor of the military, and you rule, and you're not only the U.S. military or your army's military. You are the controller of everybody's military. So you can back up this idea of heroism and saving the savages and being the moral compass of the world through through violence and through threats of violence, right? Like, and because everybody knows, the entire world knows that the colonizer has colonized. The entire world knows that you are a violent group of people. The entire world can lay out examples, pictures, evidence that they have put together themselves that would document the torture that they have committed against peoples and places around the world. But because colonialism is still intact, because the people of the world have not been able to wrestle the power out of the colonizer, they get to continue to tell their story that they were heroes, that they are the do-gooders, and that they have the moral fabric to lay over people the entire world over. There was something in the article that talked about white men's morality. And let me go back up to it. Like, white men had the moral authority, that black men were the baboons lurking in the dark, ready to pounce on people, on women. And that was the trope, right? The trope out of slavery and out of direct colonialism was this perpetuated fear that black men would pounce on any vagina walking, right? Like, they would, if left not being controlled, and they unsatiable appetite for white women in particular. They didn't care about black women because white men was raping us all up along the lines, right? But to had the black men were in control, they would pounce on the vaginas of all the white women and rape and take what the white men coveted. So we're still seeing that being played out in media when black men are being shown as the purveyors of rape, the biggest purveyor. If rape is widespread in a particular African country, what that means, without them actually directly saying that, is that black men, African men, are the rapists. And so black men are unable to control their tendencies to rape. So they're continuing and perpetuating this idea of that. And it also, what that also says, because colonialism is still in power, what that says is that colonialism, which we all know, colonizers, government, civilization, which is a white man's invention, right? That makes it so that white people and their laws and their policies are the things that prevent white African men from raping. So they come in with their militaries to save African women from being raped. They come in with their police, they come in with their institutions, the courts of justice, and all these things. And the colonial system is represented through white maleness, right? So they are the ones that gets to reinforce this idea of white men and white superiority and white morality that does not exist, when they are the ones who have created the conditions in which African women are vulnerable, African men are out here raping, and nothing in that system is helping to solve that problem whatsoever. And if there is something in that system, it's coming from within the colonized communities to solve that problem. And the colonized oppressors are not here trying to solve that problem. Another thing, and of course, if any of you want to raise your hand, you want to interject, please do so. Whenever I see a hand, I will stop and allow you to speak. Another thing from the article that we read was that it says that violence and rape was not something that was normal to African culture. Right? Now, we know Africa huge, right? We know Africa huge. And so there's many different cultures and many different peoples that exist on that land base. But I think, generally speaking, from books that we've read and people that we speak to and cultures that continue to hold the traditions very close to their chest, that there were gender roles that were expressed because this is what women did and this is what men did. There was violence. I mean, there were African struggles on the continent between different tribes, to solve problems, to get power, to get dominance, things like that. Those things that exist, but sexual violence in the ways in which, I think Africa still is one of those places where they allow dysfunction and disorganization to continue to show the world that African men are rapers, you know. Oh, we got to come in here with our, and they allow it because why? Because that gives it opening for U.S. military intervention, French military intervention. We got to come in here because the women are being raped and the babies are being killed, and that's a obviously it's a cover for what the real thing is. They don't care about no African women being raped. You know why? They raped us. They raped us. They raped us and took our babies and populated the world and used our actual human products as workers to fulfill what they need. They murdered us. They fed our babies to alligators. They don't care. They don't care nothing about the well-being of African women. Because you'll see this from time to time, right? You'll see this emerge in some sort of story and some sort of news where they talk about women's equality in Sudan and in the Congo, and they'll tell you how women are being raped and they should be concerned, and there's nonprofit and NGOs that are there trying to solve these problems, but they're not there to solve the problems. They're there to solve those problems of African people who are being raped. They're there to solve their own problems. They're there to say that they're there so they can siphon off money from people saying that they've done this work in this particular area and their work is just so amazing, right? Or the military's there because they're there for some sort of mineral, but they're using this conflict as a cover, the conflict which they very likely have started. Um, so there's a lot that can be said around rape culture and people who believe the ongoing lie that U.S. imperialism continues to tell around its beneficence to the world. So we have a healthy appetite, us as African internationalism, we have a hefty appetite of you lying. We don't believe anything U.S. imperialism says. We never take the side of U.S. imperialism ever, especially when it comes to the conditions of African people. And, so because we already know, like the history is laid out for us. Matamela, you want to read what you wrote in the chat just to give me a break from what I'm talking.
Which one?
The one at 8:44 or your time 5:44.
Okay, about the teacher.
Your practical advice is to use assignment.
Okay, yeah. My practical advice is to use the assignments and the readings to introduce African internationalist perspective, to help win others, maybe even the professor to your perspective. The problem is that we all know that colonialism is violence. I think even that person understands that, but the problem is that person is also dealing with the sort of just a liberal response to which they can't see anything outside of a nicer form of colonialism as a solution, right? I mean, this is something that we saw imposed on us in the 1950s and 60s, and why so many people love Bayard Rustin because he got Dr. King to be a pacifist and all this other stuff. What's interesting is that is that Bayard Rustin was a Zionist. Bayard Rustin was a pacifist when Africans didn't want to be a pacifist. But then white liberals will tell you when Africans didn't like Bayard Rustin that that's because he was gay. But everybody knew Bayard Rustin was gay.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And the beef with Barrett Rustin started to emerge later on. But like there's also this lady named Pauli Murray, and I like some of Pauli Murray's work. But then they'll be like, I saw this thing where Pauli Murray went to Ghana, tried to impose basically a bourgeois, petty bourgeois American position. When it didn't work, she criticized Nkrumah and did some real reactionary stuff. And then they make it be like, oh, Africans didn't like her because she was trans. That doesn't even make sense. How'd she get invited to Ghana in the first place?
Yeah.
Invited to Ghana in the first place. So it's like that's just this liberal thing. But moving it back to this, I mean, you got the whole, she was a pacifist too, right? So you got the way through which, so you got the pacifism, but I'm just thinking like tactically. So yeah, the problem is colonial violence. Um, and you can't have peace without a revolution. And also, something Chairman says is that it's not the colonized, but it's the colonizer who determines the terms in which the colonized will get free. If the
Yeah.
colonizer says by over my dead body, then they let you know what needs to be done. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, but but it's the colonize. But tactically, Africans have who've been more nonviolent than Africans. I
Listen.
mean, like white folks get just a little bit of what we deal with, and then they go postal. They get a little bit of what we deal with, then they go postal. They still got way more wealth than us, way more housing than us. I mean, it got a little bad. The election kind of didn't go their way, and they turned into spider monkeys, you know. So I just I appreciate this study. One thing I was thinking of um, uh, uh, is just the way to which this study helps us even reassess some works that are out there that I think are useful to analyze if we analyze them through the lens of African internationalism. Books
Yeah.
like Toni Morrison's Beloved and works of Tony K. Bombara and other people. I think that it's very I appreciate the way because we put the colonial question forward, that I appreciate the direction of today's study.
Mhm. I want to bring y'all attention to this book that I read, and I mean, books are good. Like, not I know everybody's not a reader, and but if you weren't born in a certain time, you so documenting history and writing them down is a way for us to keep track of the line, right? Like I wasn't born 100 years ago, but to read Marcus Garvey's works from 1920s helped me understand that these coon mm, have been cooning for way longer than this is not some new invention. The African petty bourgeoisie and how they operate is not some new invention that it was around during Garvey's time and et cetera. So I wanted to direct y'all to this book that I read called At the Dark End of the Street by Danielle McGuire.
Yeah.
Um, it
And
documents, yeah, it documents the I'm gonna missay it, maybe Massimo knows, but it documents the movement to save Black womanhood, right? They were talking. So first, there was, African women were in the movement to end lynching, right? African people was in this whole movement to end lynching of Black men. That had been a wave, a movement throughout the United States. Um, but it was a case, and I'm not going to bring up the name right now because I can't remember it. But it was this woman who was not spectacular. She was not unique. She was an African woman that was walking home after work, and a white man decided that he wanted to rape her, so he pulled her to the side or not on the road and raped her, and then sent her home. And then she somehow was disgraced as a woman because she allowed herself to be raped. And so there was a movement of people. It's like, you have these white men who said that they're protecting
Claudette
their
Colvin, that one,
say
Claudette.
yes, that's it. These white men who said that they care so much about their white womanhood, and the Black people was like, we gotta, save Black womanhood because there's African women who are being, they're saving white womanhood from nothing, right? Like there was nothing. The only thing that was harming white womanhood was white men. Right? Like white men were the purveyors of the violence that white women were experiencing, right? So, but they still had this idea that Black men were lurking in the shadows, so that going after white women, and the number of cases of white women being so-called raped by Black men in the United States was so minuscule, if not non-existent, right? But there were so many documentations of African women who were being killed, I mean, being raped. Um, and there was nothing happening to their offenders. And so that's taken us back to this idea of the morality of whiteness, right? Like the morality of white men. And there was no women's movement that was out here, white women's movement that was down with their sisters marching alongside of this movement saying, yeah, stop the rapes of white women. These white women would protect their white men and say, how dare you say that he raped this Black woman? But they know that white men did this. Women knew this from time immemorial, from the imposition of enslavement and colonialism on African people. White women were conscious of the fact that Black women, African women, were being sexually violated. Their sisters and brothers were the product of rape and violation. So this is something that, you know, whenever we forget, whenever maybe sometimes the colonial media, the bourgeois media becomes so convincing that we like, yeah, that's horrible. Ugh. You know, you forget sometimes because they do a great job brainwashing you, right? Brainwashing us to believe that this is just some weird shit that should not exist. But anytime you forget that, all you gotta do is just, just go back to a story. This is the story I want you to go back to. Like the colonial state colonizer does not care about the safety and well-being of African women, and particularly African women who are raped. I mean, and nowhere in the world, not even in the continent of Africa. And if anything, they're going to respond to that is because of some other ulterior motive. So that's the thing I wanted to go back to in terms of the morality of white men. Another theme in the article, and of course, if you're ready, you can go ahead and put your hand up and I'll call on you. But another theme in the article is the rape and exploitation of African women serve the material interests of capitalism. We talked about that a little bit already, where, African women produced human people. And as laborers, and those human people became laborers, domestic servants, and all kinds of things for colonialism, right? And African women as laborers ourselves, right? I think we went through that was like the first study that we did, that we can't discount the fact that, yeah, we were out here giving birth to laborers. We were also laborers. We were also in the fields. We were also doing the backbreaking work. We were also doing the same thing as African men and expected to do just as much as the numbers. There was no, you know, we don't expect women to do as much. The colonizer expected African women to produce just as much as African men in the same sort of work. And even that famous speech by Sojourner Truth that says, "Ain't I a woman?" In it, she says, "I can do just as much as a man. I can produce just as much, and I can work hard and even harder than that, and a man." And this concept was not lost on the ears of African people who have seen and experienced the equality, the sort of imposed equality, right? Like the equality of the genders under colonial oppression, but the imposition of colonialism on in the colonized, oppressed people, right? So you expected to deliver in the same ways that in which, regardless of your gender, regardless of your adult maybe if you're a child, there was maybe a little bit of that. I don't know, believe it though. But the reinforcement of colonial white people, European patriarchy was real, right? So European patriarchy. So I'm opening up this discussion again around this idea that patriarchy was learned. I've heard through my many years of being AMWO president that patriarchy was not some newfound thing that was dropped in the middle of Africa, but that patriarchy existed inside the continent of Africa and was in existence beforehand. And so what we've often said is that patriarchy in the sense of what, right? Like, we know in Europe, when Europe met Africa, women were property. They had no rights. And you could even look at their own movies. Kings and queens had to kill a king, or she was not even a queen for real, or in the, but there was this, women in the most lowest class sector still had to have their men speak for them, and they have to do all these other kind of things. They had to have a brother or a father or something like that that spoke on their behalf. And if they did not marry someone, then they were what's the word? Um they were ensured a life of misery and poverty, because the man had the money. Even if he was a poor man, at least you had the protection of a man. And that's what was necessary in the wild, wild, savage world of Europe in the Middle Ages. So this idea that Europe deposited this sort of patriarchy on the continent of Africa and established some new sort of social norm that can be disputed. Like, some people try to dispute that, and and I want to open it up too, because we might be also speaking about other colonized communities who may not be African, but also we can see some examples in how the internal dynamics of those populations was shifted based on the dominant, um, violent, military, aggressive, colonizer imposing policy, shifting away from cultural norms, and and the the repercussions for not following these things was jail, was, you know, killed, hanged, all these other kind of things. So, I mean, do we think that I know we're all like African internationalists, right? So we know that's not like, yeah, patriarchy was the positive, but like, is there somebody who may have some questions about that, or might have something they want to contribute regarding that topic or point? Go ahead, MQ.
um, about European society is basically like like the Franks, right?
Hmm.
And then they were the Germanic tribe. There were a bunch of like tribes. It's like that were very like militaristic, and then
Hmm.
so everything revolved around the military. And then so of course then their women are always in a subordinate position. And then I think was it Cheikh Anta Diop who mentioned it's like the lack of resources in Europe, then that scarcity then promoted a militaristic mindset, and then so um and then of course it's like they brought that to the entire world, and then they convinced us to think, oh, that we always had it. But then of course, if you're looking at the history of the continent of Africa, then we know that's not true.
Yeah. Well, thank you, MQ. I think you bring up a great point around scarcity. Because you know how, like, they said that people who grew up during like the Depression, they've learned to like hoard. They learn to hoard resources. They learn to like wash paper towels and hang them up because they don't know when they're going to get another paper towel. And this is the behavior of a hoarder, like colonial capitalism behavior of a hoarder. You don't know when you're going to lose it, so you got to be aggressively, trying to save whatever it is that you can out of an old and dying system. And we see that manifest itself through all of the behaviors and characteristics of colonialism, which is parasitic, of course. Um so let me see here. The article challenges the narrative that patriarchy is indigenous to African culture, and it shows that colonialism was introduced by Eurocentric gender roles using religion, state power, and cultural indoctrination. Do we agree with that? Or do we think that patriarchy existed in Africa? Coco.
I mean, again, Africa is a huge continent with
Mhm.
different cultures and traditions. So And if you do enough research, but you learn about not only differences in patriarchal versus patriarchal and other colonized terms for gender systems, but also different genders and things like that. So, do I believe that there was patriarchy in Africa before the colonists? Yes, but I think it functioned in a different way. Just
Mhm.
like slavery existed on the continent of Africa before the colonizer, but
Mhm.
it changes when you introduce a colonizer because they always do it in an overt or different way. Such as chattel slavery was different than the slave systems, most of the slave systems that existed in West Africa before the colonizer.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you, comrade. Edith put something in the chat, and if you don't mind, Edith, you can come off mute if you want to, or I can read it for you. Um, you said that you had taken an anthropology class, and they talked about certain African cultures. When a girl turned 11, her mother would sell her for $1,000. And I think when we like that reminds me of like what they call female genital mutilation, the practice of, and it's very depends on who you're talking to and what people you're talking to and what region of the continent of Africa you and where that even originated, because there's some discussion about whether that was originated through Arab colonization or whether that was intrinsically African. But it reminds me of that practice, and that mostly African women are the ones who perform the procedure. And that's mostly about inheritance. That's mostly about marriageability and being able to sell like they don't call it selling. They say marry your child off. And in order to get the highest dowry or sort of exchange for your daughter, she has to be, fixed, or she has to be, sewed up, to ensure that you're able to get that exchange value, and she has to be a virgin despite the man not having to have that. I just wanted to say that because that may very well have existed long before the European colonizer stepped foot onto the continent of Africa. I think what has allowed it to persist, that these old antiquated sort of systems and traditions that shouldn't have value. But the reason why they do have value is because of the scarcity that has been created through the parasitism of colonialism. When you don't have money, I mean, nobody, I'm just trying to imagine. I see your hand, Masamela. I'm just trying to imagine, right? The continent of Africa, with the wealthiest continent by far on the face of the planet, that has so many valuable resources. I mean, it's probably like trees littered with fruits and, just things around. Culture is at abundance. People just genius at abundance, solving problems at abundance. This is the genius of Africa and African people is, unbridled, I think, in the world, but they don't get to experience that because of the devastating attack that continues to happen to Africa. And so what are we left with? Because we can't develop these resources in the way that we need to. We can't develop these other sort of practices that will ensure that women are safe and that you don't have to trade off a child for some, cows and a piece of land. You know what I mean? Because we don't have that, because of the scarcity of that is created because of the colonialism, you leave these African people with these antiquated old ways of being, and some of us have romanticized that. Some African people have romanticized these sort of traditions as ways that as things that the European hasn't influenced, but by the very fact that they have influenced the entire continent by creating scarcity, creating conditions in which African people have to fight for every living thing, created a situation where African girls are not valued, created a situation where African women are not valued outside of their ability to get married and to create more wealth for a family, and that men are the ones who are valuable in terms of being able to create wealth in another way other than just being married off. So I think, we have to, when we see these sort of backwards things that maybe existed prior to colonialism, we also have to recognize that the fact that they are not past that, out of that stage, is because colonialism trapped them there because of the existence of parasitism and scarcity that's is on the African continent. Masamela?
Yeah, I mean that's a absolutely important point you're making because the question is, like I said, if there's elements that we can define as patriarchal that existed, and like you said, and they haven't been eradicated in the last 600 years, then of course what that does is that proves that capitalism, colonial capitalism, is not the progressive force
Hmm.
that it says it is. So that's one thing, right? The other thing is it's important to maybe push back against that because what happens is when people say that, then it eventually becomes a reactionary point to suggest that, well, there's always been some form of gender oppression, there's always been some form of racism or something like that. So because that's always existed, which is not absolutely true, it hasn't always existed, but because it's always existed, then the two would end would be then to why fight against it? If you think it's always existed, then why fight against it? So because so you get the feminist historians, there's people that I like, Barbara Ehrenreich, things like that, who write these histories of violence and male violence and stuff like that, and this long history of male violence. Well, Chairman has done this. Chairman says, well, we talking about patriarchy under capitalism, under colonial capitalism. That's the question here. It's not whether 600 years ago. Yeah, and I'm not here to offend anybody, Sister Amania. So I accept your correction. Arab doesn't mean Muslim at all. You know, it doesn't. So it's not even a point of contention, sister, at all. I appreciate the correction. So the uh, uh um so the point is but back to my main point, yeah, is that, yeah, if it's always been there, it but the other thing is that all historical accounts of
Hmm.
even colonizers show that from say 7th century Arab travelers all the way up to the 19th century, that from our own assessment, what we would call progressive, Africa had more progressive understandings of gender and sexuality. Are we talking utopia? No, we're not talking about a utopia. But the thing is, the socialist understanding is the question about socialism is how we can use technology to move society forward.
Yeah.
That's the question. So if we're stuck, if colonialism keeps us stuck in a position in which sort of like the means of production are only used to produce wealth
Hmm.
for the people in power, then that keeps us trapped in the past, and like you said, so I wanted to say that because of the fact that, like I said, now the interesting thing is that, the Arab travelers or the early European colonizers, it's not like they're coming to Africa and they're saying, wow, this place is so great because there's sexual freedom and there's trans people and there's people we would call homosexual. But what happens is they're saying, okay, these people's family relations and gender relations and sexuality aren't like ours. You need to give us the support to go into Africa and so that we can make them like us. There's a
Hmm.
story of a 19th century a king in what's now Uganda, who have and the sister
Amina.
Amani Amina
Amina.
is very correct. I mean, I would say check out that guy Butch Ware who ran for vice president for the Green Party. He has a great book called The Walking Quran, that I would suggest people check out. It mostly looks at the long history Islam and what's now a Senegal and stuff like that, especially Sufism and stuff like that. So the sister's absolutely correct. Like I said, uh, um, but but the main point but what happened with this king is that the king, he basically was like gay. Uh, uh,
Mhm.
but what happened was the British came in with guns,
Mhm.
and power, and said, "Hey, you need to start practicing these sexual relations, and you
Mhm.
need to enforce this worldview on your people." And he changed up because it was about power and resources. And now Uganda, the most reactionary place on the
Mhm.
continent when it comes to same gender love and African people. But those exact same colonizers who enforce that colonial worldview on Uganda, will now lift up Uganda as the reason why we need a new form of imperialism, which is like a sort of a pink washing. I think they refer to it as pink washing, or like you see it in Israel, where they'll say things like, well, in Israel we have homosexuals that are in our Air Force, and what would happen to you if Palestine took over, and that sort of nonsense and things like that. So yeah, so I appreciate that. Like I said, the accounts of even the colonizers attest to the fact that there was different. And the question is the relationship between ideas and the mode of production. That's
Yeah.
the question. It's not whether some people had bad ideas. That's
Mhm.
not the question. It's question whether the social system at play gives credit to the bad ideas and the bad practices, right?
Mhm.
That's the question at hand. And we know that all these things we talk about were punishable by death. You know,
Yes.
and there was a lot, but on top of that, there was very few things in African society that were punishable by death. That's the other thing. You talk going all the way back to the Nubian pharaohs.
Mhm.
Them people got rid of capital
Mhm.
punishment and
Mhm.
like that. So yeah, so I appreciate this, and I appreciate the sister Amina in the chat as well.
Yeah, I wanted to raise the whole death thing. Like, I mean, these aren't Africans. I was watching this show called, it was like, this used to be popular. They used to go like to the South Pacific, Vanuatu,
Oh
and
yeah, them Africans.
I know, but some people. Anyway,
I mean, they call that area New Guinea. They call it Africa Guinea. But the thing is, the people in Vanuatu is Africans too. I mean, they call themselves Africans. So who am I to say they are not?
listen, I agree. But I was watching. This is probably the only time I really watched this show. But this is a show that a woman, she was um forced to marry a pretty prominent man from another tribe. And I think he was trying to have sex with her, and she killed him and she ran away. So the tribe was like, how they would settle this, they didn't go after the woman. They was just like, he died, you gotta pay us some resource, you gotta pay us some reparations. Like, and the reparations was like cowrie shells or something like that. Cowrie shells was how they monetized the themselves. And the the church was missions was like, yo, y'all savages need to stop using cowrie shell. This is like in the 2000s. Y'all savages need to stop using cowrie shells and use money, their money. And so some of the tribe members is like, yo, we don't take cowrie shells no more. And we're gonna go and you gotta give us the money. And he was like, we ain't got no money. What are you talking about? This is how we settle disputes. Like, this is traditionally how we settle disputes. Now you're saying because the white man says you gotta give you some paper money that somehow, so they're about to go to war. They could have been resolved with a bunch of cowrie shells, and they're about to go to war because the European colonizer says that you have to use paper money, and this is not how they resolve disputes because they ain't had this paper money that they required. That was an aside because what you were saying in terms of like this question of how do we resolve disputes and how penalties, corporal punishment, things like that was not evident. And I would imagine, because I've read other kinds of books too, that these systems of punishment and discipline and things like that we're not equitable to the kinds of things that Europe would later deposit on the continent of Africa and many other places around the world. And I think just that story too also helps us understand that it's not just the imposition of the gun, right? But through the imposition of patriarchal religions and other forms of control that was used to, create dissension and create this sort of like, throw people off from what they would normally do. I'm going to try to wrap it up. And the last thing that I'm going to go into, like the last kind of talking points I wanted to explore was, um, during the closing of the article, the sister was like, we are going to help you learn. She was talking about African men. That if African men to continue to struggle with, the question of violence. And I wanted to correct it too. I just want to also, I mean, we could dominantly say that African men engage in these sort of violent behaviors because, it's evident. But I also want to say that there are ways that women, African women, also engage in these sort of violent behaviors too. Like the idea of always pinning the violence and all of the things on African men negates the fact that African women also experience colonialism, right? In many different ways, but also can be the architects of it as well. And I have seen where, you reinforce these sort of negative displays of stuff. I've seen like some instances in other cultures where, mothers, it may not be African, but mothers, reinforce the idea of killing a child because they go off the cultural path and they don't subscribe to what is norm, and they're going to make the family look bad because they just want to put a tattoo on their skin and they want to wear their hair in a ponytail or some shit, just stuff like. I'm laughing because that's the way that I explain things because it's so ridiculous, but like it's not a laughing matter. But that there are ways in which that women, colonized women, can also reinforce these horrible, harmful, toxic, very dangerous, violent ways in which African women are harmed, and African women in particular. And I just wanted to explore this last thing around, then how do we solve this problem? And she says we have to be engaged and deal with the violence as a part of the anti-colonial process. And what does that look like? Does that look like engaging with it now, right? Or are we waiting for the future where we might, we get to organize all the people, all the Africans, all the colonized people together, regardless of gender, and we get to win the revolution. And then then does it happen after the revolution, or is it something that we engage in at this time to deal with the issue? And if that's the case, and we don't want the colonial state to be the end all be all for the justice needs to be handed out in order to deal with people who are offenders in our community, then what does that look like when we talk about solving for some of the things that happen within the colony, and then amongst colonized people, and some of the things that happen to the colony, right? Like, what does it mean to push back against the rape culture of, the colonial oppressors? And what does it look like to push back against, how it's been deposited into our communities, and what things can we implement now organizationally, individually, to prevent or to deal with some of these ongoing purveying behaviors or beliefs. So, does anybody have any ideas? I mean, I'm not looking for to save the world, but like, we can open up for a discussion. Cause I've gotten that. I'm gonna talk until somebody raise their hand or talk through it, right? Because I've seen people say, um, well, they go to feminism because feminism is a way for them to talk about these ideas and shame men into doing certain things and requiring men to become feminists in order to deal with some of these contradictions. But that doesn't solve I don't think you can have the whole world of men being feminists, but still colonialism is the is the ruling system, and you still want to have levels of rape culture that exist. I mean, for God's sakes, the beginnings of colonial capitalism was the enslavement of African human beings and the trade and the trade of human bodies all over the world. And so now one of the biggest industries I'm going to say that's profitable that no one seems to be stopping or cracking down on is the human trafficking of human beings across the world, right? So when we look at ways that we can, prevent, how can we organize now to prevent some of the contradictions that we've talked about today from really persevering as ideas in our community? Um, and it may be hard sometimes to also address that because I know like things have been popping up, Bill Cosby, Puffy, um, and some other like R. Kelly, again, despite the fact that there's Epstein's, despite the fact that there's Trump's whose first election was talking about grab a woman by her pussy, despite the fact that there are these white men who are egregious, the prevailing view, the documentaries that come up, the trials that are popularized are of African men who are exhibiting the same sort of destructive behaviors as the white bourgeois counterparts. And so, how do we recognize that, but also deal with the contradiction in a way that is, reparative? MQ?
Well, I think like normalizing like African revolutionary culture
Mm-hmm.
that will um like minimize it and then will like isolate like the ones who are continuing to be problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if that
That's
helps.
helpful. Yeah, I think, definitely putting forth revolutionary culture. And that is very important because we don't have that amongst the masses right now. I think when we were looking at like the 60s and 70s, Black and I'm Proud, and you had the Black Panthers, there was a feel of revolutionary culture that existed. That was, even if you wasn't a revolutionary, you could act like it and you was cool because you was acting like that. MQ, did you want to say something else as well?
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about like in North St. Louis, it's like there's the Vanguard basketball court and then how that basically um addresses like the problem of quote unquote gangs
Mm,
in the community. And
mhm,
then suddenly then young African um men don't have to feel to like participate in this like war to acquire resources, and then so the energies are become um, channeled into revolutionary activity,
mhm,
and um, then it becomes about, yeah, it's like working towards liberation as, and then upholding like the and empowering the sisters,
mhm,
and um yeah, so like how like the basketball court just did so much to
mhm,
address that, and then soon the Uhuru Bakery and Cafe
mhm.
will do that even more. Uhuru.
Wow. You make a really good point in terms of like how to influence culture. I remember one of the speeches that the chairman gave. It's on YouTube. I don't know if that it wasn't on our channel. It was on somebody else's channel. It was a couple of channels that used to always do post chairman speaking. I was like, you gotta get them to give us credit because nobody knows where this man is coming from. But there was this one where chairman was talking to in the community because I think there was like a lot of like internal horizontal violence that was happening and vertical violence. I'm sorry. No, horizontal. And he was in the room with, obviously members of opposing groups. And one of the things that um I appreciated because you could see that this was an attempt to rectify a solution in our communities that will cause harm to people. because of whatever beef they were going through. And it was not like lectury or, I mean, the chairman is a good orator. He speaks and, you feel it. But what he was saying is like, I thought it was dope. He was like, he was trying to redirect sort of the violence and educate the people there about anti-colonial violence versus the horizontal violence, right? And he's like, he said, when it comes to bucking back at the cop, this is not his direct language, but when it comes to bucking back at the cops, you miss. You don't know how to shoot. he's like you're missing it, when it comes to harming our community, you can jump up, put the gun between your legs and shoot in another direction and you're going like, you straight targets, you know what I mean? And he was just like, just making the inference that you gotta work for the community. You have to be able to use whatever, things that you're learning on the street to be able to defend the community. And one of the things that the sister also says is that, you want to protect and defend African women. And I have a little, I irk a little bit because I want to be protected and defended, but I also want to be able to defend and protect myself and others. You know, I think a lot of what we see around African women being victims is purposeful. I think there's a lot of African women who are not victims or who don't wait until a group of mercenaries come into their village to rape and kill them. I think that there are a lot of women who are fighting back. And I think part of to answer my own question is just also preparing ourselves to not be victimized by the system in any way, shape, or form, whether it's internal or whether it's from the state. So, what does that look like to prepare ourselves for defense? What does it look like to protect others? And that's a rhetorical question. I think I know what it looks like, but it's about thinking about what sort of things we can put in place to ensure that if ain't nobody else going to do it, then we going to do it. But also, I think a really important part about being a revolutionary is that you have to always educate others. And when I was reading a book around Burkina Faso, not Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, and how the revolutionaries went into different locations around the country, and the way they did PE is that they would find somebody who was walking in the woods to collect, some resources to bring back to the village, and they would do PE with them. And they said, next time you come back to they were doing this undercover because they didn't want nobody to know that they were in the woods. When they said, next time you come back, bring somebody else. And then that person will come back. Next thing you know, they have PE sessions in the woods. And that's the kinds of things that will have to happen in our community. And if it's hard for somebody to understand that you shouldn't violate, a woman or violate a child or be oppressive or dangerous or violent toward any vulnerable sector of our community, then, and if it's hard for them to get that through political education, there are other ways that we can resolve that through revolutionary justice, which is, the court of the African masses who can address any harmful behavior. Because in the past, if somebody was harmful to the village, they just they let you wander by yourself. They kicked you out the village. Because when you're kicked out the village, you would probably not survive very long because you don't have no people to belong to. So that was worse than jail because, in jail, you still got community, you still got the officer that's still there. And when you're out, when you're excommunicated from the people, then you don't have the resources that come along with being a part of a community. So, any other ideas or solutions that we can bring up in terms of like thinking about how we can engage in sort of anti-colonial reparation work, not reparation in terms of like resources, but like maybe resources, but repairing is what I mean. Repairing um, in the moment that we're living in today to prepare for that world that we are building for. Coco.
Uhuru, I think the number one thing is like it is political education. It is teaching each other how to love each other.
Mhm.
I remember, was it a couple years ago? I don't remember which conference it was, but one of the subjects was Black love and like African love and what that looks like. I think you and Matsamela sat on on that panel, but seeing how relationships work. And like I remember when I first was coming into the party and coming into the Uhuru movement, and the people that brought me in said like African internationalism and being a part of the party, the structure actually made their relationship stronger because you had accountability to each other.
Mhm.
And that's what we have to have. Like we have to have accountability to each other. Like at us as comrades, you have held me accountable, and
Mhm.
I've had to go ahead and address that. I had to address that contradiction, So I think that's like one of the most positive, like when we again we read Wretched of the Earth and look in, revolution is also psychological. So we
Mhm.
do have to, it's psychological, it's physical, and it is material. So we have to look at that psychological piece and the spiritual piece of holding each other accountable, not just in like, oh, you did this crime or you did this harm. Let's differentiate harm and
Right.
crime. You did
Mhm.
this harm, instead of like, it's not just harm, it's like what your action, what your contradiction is actually not just a weakness in yourself, because if it's a weakness in yourself, it's a weakness in the whole movement.
Yeah. Aurora, I love that. If you're allowed to be contradictory, that's because the people around you have allowed you to be contradictory. They have not held you to account. I love that. Well, thank you, comrade. I'm gonna uh, start our closing. So I want to appreciate everybody for participating this evening, and definitely come back with us, all of the R&DP studies, for the next Thursdays coming up. And we'll be back in September, where we're going to have a guest for our study, director Aisha Fields of the All African Peoples Education and Defense Fund, and we're going to talk about charity versus self-determination, the rise of NGO in the name of helping women and children. I kind of touched on that right now in this study, this NGOism. But the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project has been imperative in like really showcasing that charity is not the way that we solve the problems of African people, but African self-determination is, and organizing sectors of our community to participate in projects that build those dual and contending power institutions. And we're going to talk about some of those in September, how charity replaces justice, with the co-host of APDEP, Feminism and Geopolitics, Dependency versus Self-Determination. And this all centers around African women, but it's a broader discussion too that may not, we might touch on African women, but we're going to go probably beyond that. And so I think I'm really looking forward to that. And in October, we're going to go over policing prisons in the colonial war and African women. It's similar to what this is, but really talking about the military institutions and how they've um, been instrumental in capturing and oppressing African women. So looking at state violence, political prisoners and resistance movements, and the ways in which African women have participated in those things as well. So I just want to make these last few announcements. I want to invite everyone to our Fit to Fight um, Black August Zoom meditation workouts, with our comrades hosting it from LA. You can register for these sessions on our platform. So you can go to our website and go to events, and you can just register for this. And it's Sunday at 9 a.m. and then workouts every day from 6 a.m. Meditation and mindfulness on Tuesdays. No, not every day, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So definitely check them out and just RSVP to get reminders about this. We are on August 31st. Next Sunday, we're going to be doing Animals the Breakdown, which will not be a live interactive study like this, but we will be on the apps and you'll be able to chat with us on the platforms and we'll be able to comment and respond to you on those platforms. So we won't just be in Zoom. And the topic for that show is Hood Feminism and the Illusion of Liberation, Sunday, August 31st from 3:30 to 5 p.m. And we're going to be discussing how these empowering narratives often leave African women as victims of colonial parasitism. And we're going to examine how, the iterations of feminism don't help to solve the problem, but keeps us steeped in the contradiction as opposed to providing a vision or a path on the way out of that. How do we overturn that? To what end? We know all the problems exist, and what then do we do? So really looking at that from the African internationalist perspective for African women. If you are, and I'm doing these backwards, obviously. So if you are in St. Louis this weekend on Saturday, we're going to have our One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market on August 23rd. And it's going to be not at O'Fallon Park. It's going to be at the Uhuru House, 4101 West Florissant. And come check us out and support the vendors who have been loyal vendors of the market and continue to support. And so we want y'all to come out and support them too. So definitely check us out at 4101 West Florissant on August 23rd, Saturday from 10 to 3 p.m. Central. You can find out more information at oneafricamarket.com. And you can also just, let us know. And if you're interested in being a vendor, just go ahead and go to that website and sign up to be a vendor. And we also look forward to collaborating with the InPDUM convention next month in September, when the market is also going to be done in conjunction with the InPDUM convention as well. So we look forward to seeing y'all in St. Louis and participating and sharing the space with the vendors and the convention. And then we've been talking a lot about sexuality and gender during this study, but on September 7th, it's going to be a Harriet Daughters book club. It's going to focus on the book Compulsory Sexuality as Colonial Control. And it's going to be about refusing compulsory sexuality, a Black asexual lens on our sex-obsessed culture by Sharonda J. Brown. She offers new perspectives on asexuality. She takes an incisive look on how anti-Blackness, white supremacy, patriarchy, and heteronormativity and capitalism enact harm against these asexual people, contextualizing axiophobia within a racial framework. That's a lot of words. And she's not an African internationalist, and she lists a couple of things on here, like some white supremacy, patriarchy, hetero. Like these are all different things, and so we come to the study so we can talk about those concepts, but mostly the one around compulsory sexuality. So September 7th, you can go to our events page on our website to find out more and register for that. And again, we just want to keep y'all updated that we are still doing the postering campaign in the 5 cities plus more. We want to shout out to DC and Philadelphia and Newark, New Jersey for coming into the fold of putting up these posters, and appreciate our comrades in Maryland and San Diego, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and Brooklyn for also putting up these posters and making sure that people see an anti-colonial perspective around state-sponsored kidnapping for African children is tied to our desire to build on-the-ground local committees in our communities so that we can build an actual movement to push back against this harmful uh, parasitic system of family policing. And as always, we call on African women to join the African National Women's Organization by going to anwouhuru.org/join. If you believe that the only way to transform our material conditions is to do it collectively under a unified objective, definitely go ahead and check out our membership and its levels. And we welcome you into the fold. And if you are not an African woman, you still feel free to contribute and support the African National Women's Organization. Anybody is welcome to participate in our projects. The leadership will always be African women, but anybody is welcome to participate in our projects, and contribute their skills and their time and resources to helping us be successful in whatever that we are doing. So you can do so by becoming a donor, but you can also volunteer your time in one of the many things that we have going on. And then once again, I want to thank you all. And if you haven't donated, please consider to continue to donate to reach our $100 goal. Go to anwouhuru.org slash donate to donate. And if you don't want to go that and you want to do it through Zelle, you can use our email, which is info@anwouhuru.org slash anwouhuru.org. Info@anwouhuru.org as the email for Zelle. Thank you again. So we'll see you again next third Thursday in September for our next Harriet's Daughter RNDP study session. And appreciate you. Thank you. Uhuru. How do we stop this? Stop share. Thank you, comrades.